Good morning, everyone. I'm noticing folks may be starting to trickle in. So Andrea, if we can maybe advance to the next slide. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I am Louise Garrity. I am the Government Partnerships Lead at JPAL North America. We wanted to start off with a few housekeeping notes. So please feel free to rename yourself on Zoom the way we've suggested on the slide, with your names, pronouns, jurisdictions. As we're waiting for more folks to join, we'd love to hear in the chat where you're joining us from today. And a note to please mute yourself when not speaking. I wanted to also add that we will be taking a few screenshots throughout the session. If you, for whatever reason, would not like to be screenshotted, please let us know on the JPAL team. My colleague Leslie Harkins will be able to kind of take care of that. And then the other thing is that we will be recording the main session today. So if you would prefer, for whatever reason, to have your camera off, please feel free. And we will not be recording the discussion sessions at the end. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share our convening objectives for today. We will be sharing best practices and stories from researcher-practitioner partnerships that can help jurisdictions advance efforts to build capacity for research, data, and evidence use. We are facilitating knowledge sharing and networking among policymakers and connecting jurisdictions interested in research and identifying jurisdictions who may be interested in a program evaluation partnership either now or in the future. So to talk through our agenda for today, I'll be giving a brief overview of the LEVER program. Then we'll get into our panel sessions. We have 3 great panels for you today with some great speakers, so I'm really excited to hear from. We will then have breakout discussion sessions where we'll be able to engage in conversation a bit more with our panelists. And then I'll have some brief closing remarks for the full group at the end. So with that, I will get into an overview of LEVER. So to kind of motivate the whole project that you've been hearing a lot about, you've been hearing from us a lot about, across the United States, state and local government leaders are leading economic mobility efforts in their communities as they implement programs to address historic levels of income inequality, rising housing instability, and the impacts of climate change. This work comes at a time of historic federal funding in programs run by state and local governments. And these funds catalyze a huge opportunity for states and localities to spur a movement of evidence building that informs equitable programming and economic mobility for years to come. From local rental assistance to statewide tutoring programs to sector-based job training, now is the time for governments to fund evidence-based approaches. Decision makers can use this evidence to improve and scale up effective policies and programs in order to reach more people, advancing economic mobility and racial equity. So on the next slide, I'll talk about, while state and local governments are interested in evidence-based policymaking, many face barriers to effectively generate, find, and use rigorous evidence to address social challenges. For example, a lack of agency-wide policies around evaluation can make it difficult to prioritize staff time, data infrastructure, and planning for this work. So LEVER prepares state and local jurisdictions to rigorously evaluate their own programs and to use existing evidence in developing programs and policies. Governments participating in LEVER will come away with a basic understanding of evaluation, knowledge of what it takes to build evidence and evaluation capacity, and the opportunity to access tailored support to develop their own rigorous evaluations. So to talk through these opportunities in more detail, first is our training sprint, which is a multi-week virtual engagement aimed at teams of government leaders with some experience or capacity for embedding evaluation into its decision-making process. Through programming over several weeks, a cohort of government teams will learn together how to identify and use rigorous evidence, develop and/or strengthen their agency's evaluation policies, and build capacity to develop future evaluations. We also have coming up our Evaluating Social Programs course, which is a 5-day in-person training that provides an in-depth look at why and when randomized evaluations can be used to rigorously measure the impact of social programs. So this will be in person 5 days in Cambridge. Next is our evaluation incubators. These provide in-depth support for government agencies as they turn ideas into well-designed randomized evaluations of social programs. Through an evaluation incubator, governments receive training, one-on-one technical assistance, flexible funding, and connections to academic researchers to develop their evaluations. And then we have our convenings with researchers. So these provide opportunities for researchers and government leaders and staff to connect and share ideas about evaluation opportunities. The goal of these convenings is for researchers to add capacity and potentially lead these evaluations with policymakers. And lastly, I'll mention our office hours and coaching support. So these provide one-on-one support to answer questions related to evidence use, evaluation, and lever program offerings. So feel free to connect with us and other experts in evidence use and evaluation implementation to address a challenge or hurdle, a question, and to help you understand which lever program offering might be best suited for your needs. Lever brings together the complementary expertise of Results for America and JPAL North America. Results for America is a leading national nonprofit organization with deep experience helping policymakers at all levels of government harness the power of evidence and data to solve the world's greatest challenges. JPAL North America is a research center based at MIT, anchored by a network of academic researchers. We partner with leaders in the public, nonprofit, and private sectors to rigorously study what strategies meaningfully reduce poverty. Together, we are committed to equipping state and local governments with the resources needed to create a culture of evidence and data use in decision-making. So now we will get into our panel sessions. And note that we will have time in breakout discussion groups for questions. We will be monitoring the chat, so feel free to note questions as they arise, and we'll do our best to either respond directly or note those questions for the breakout discussions later on. We have 3 panel discussions today, one on the topic of laying the foundations for research, and then we will get into researcher government partnerships in state and local governments, and lastly on engaging community in the research process and policymaking. So with that, I will move into our first panel, laying the foundation for research. And I will hand the reins over to my colleague, Chelsea Powell at Results for America, who will be facilitating our first discussion. So please take it away, Chelsea.
So great to be with you all today. I am really excited to have a conversation with Rachel and Rachel, 2 incredible leaders around evidence, culture building, and building this sort of use for evaluation into your work every day in state and local government. So I think if we could spotlight all 3 of us, that would be amazing. Awesome. As Louise said, I'm Chelsea Powell. I'm at Results for America. I'm the Associate Director of Local Practice there, and I have had the privilege of co-leading this lever project with JPAL. We have spent the last year building and establishing resources that go from how to really figure out how to run an evaluation with JPAL to how to develop an evaluation policy and think about your evaluation culture. So we're going to start in that space today. And I would love for my 2 colleagues here to introduce themselves. I think I'll start with Rachel Leventhal-Weiner, who's on my screen first, and then pass it to Rachel Maltz.
Great. Thanks, Chelsea. My name is Rachel Leventhal-Weiner. I'm the Director of Evaluation and Impact for the State of Connecticut's Office of Policy and Management. I sit in the Office of Policy Management, which is our budget office, on the data and policy analytics team. And I've been in this role for about 18 months, leading work that's focused primarily on the American Rescue Plan funded projects, but what's good for them is good for all state business. And that's what I continue to tell people.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Maltz. Thank you again to the JPAL team and RFA for having me today. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the City of Carlsbad, and I work in the Innovation and Economic Development Department. I've been with the City of Carlsbad for about a year and a half. So prior to that, I worked for an economic development corporation in San Diego that was focusing on business development across San Diego County. Currently, I'm in charge of leading the design and implementation of a cohesive performance management program, which focuses on project management, metrics development, and training. And also now we're focusing a bit more on operational efficiency, which is focusing on conducting evaluations. So looking forward to the conversation today, and thank you guys again for having me.
Thank you both so much. One thing I think would be super helpful to start with is hearing sort of how you found yourself in a role like this and what drove you to a position where you're working on using and building evidence in government every day.
Happy to take a stab. So I think for us, our city's culture has been always driven around data management and how are we actually using data in our daily operations. I think with bringing myself on board, the focus was making that transition of how do we continue to drive a culture of innovation and process improvements. And all of that stems from using evidence in our daily work. So I think for me personally, that's kind of what drove me to this work of how can we actually make an impact and change, and how do we actually stand up a department where all of this work is fairly new within our local government. So I think that's been the priority of our city, of how do we actually continue to grow the culture of evidence and evaluation just in our daily operations.
For me, it's interesting. I think it's kind of the other way around. We're trying to make the case as a state for standing up potentially a role like a chief evaluation or chief impact kind of role. We have a chief data role. We have a statewide longitudinal data system. We've got a lot of the pieces in place to be able to do some great across agency evaluation. But the real proof point for us was the role that the American Rescue Plan funding played in pandemic recovery, and sort of the high standard that exists for using evidence and generating evaluation. So our chief data officer saw an opportunity to create a role where, we sort of place an emphasis on this and demonstrated over the lifetime of the funds, how we're using evidence to make some of our budgeting decisions. We don't have a performance culture or an evidence-based budgeting process here in our state, but we do have really active and engaged data leaders and research leaders, not evenly distributed across agencies or across projects, but we're trying to make the case with these funds, because if it wasn't someone's explicit job, it would be really hard to kind of wrangle all of these projects together. And I'm a social scientist by training, so I came to this work from an executive branch agency in state government where I was helping them tell their story with data. So for me personally, it sort of combines a lot of my educator, relationship builder, researcher skills together, because a lot of selling the value of doing this work is about relationship building and trust building. So that's a lot of what I do right now.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that I think the American Rescue Plan certainly supported folks in seeing is sort of like, what do we mean when we say evidence and evaluation culture? And there's some like clear guidance within the American Rescue Plan, Treasury guidance around looking for evidence-based models and evaluating new pilots, and also just like having performance metrics and sort of understanding the difference between outputs and outcomes that I think for a lot of governments and honestly organizations everywhere, right? That's hard. It's a pivot. It's not sort of the traditional way of doing things. And despite sort of knowing theoretically, conceptually that it matters and it works and it helps improve outcomes, making that shift is really hard. And so a lot of the work of Lever has been thinking about sort of those steps toward building that culture. But one thing that we talked about a little bit, but would love to hear from you all more on is sort of when you think about the steps and building an evidence based culture. What does that mean? Like, what does that mean, or what do you want that to mean within your government?
I feel like I was just talking with the chief data. He was just sitting right here, like not an hour ago, and we were just having a discussion about how some projects are a really sort of mature, developed place to really take on shovel-ready evaluation, and then some are just really getting off the ground. And I think one of the things that I think about when I think about that evidence-based culture is the need for the data culture before you get there. Because if you don't have a data culture, then trying to use data as evidence and evaluate things is a little trickier. So you have to kind of meet people where they are and take a step back. For us, this work has been not just creating transparency around the spending of funds, and I don't want to say too much about that American Rescue Plan stuff, but it's been about building capacity and really meeting our agency colleagues where they are and helping them build the kind of lenses and skills that they need just from an analytics perspective. That's before we get into anything having to do with use of information to get into evaluation. And then some folks are further sort of developed in their skills or their lenses, and so we can meet them in a different place. So for us, kind of thinking about laying that foundation and building that evaluation culture has to start with building that data literacy and that data culture. If that didn't exist, it's much harder to sort of just like burst into the evaluation space.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Rachel there in terms of, data availability and data quality. So we want to make sure that the data needs are available, they're becoming reliable, and it's sufficient across the entire organization. Sometimes it takes a while to get there, and it takes a while to train your staff on how to actually work with data. We found success on using training models internally across departments. So I think that's where we continue to build this organizational culture. And over time, I think that might take a while. It's a big change management initiative in terms of kind of taking that shift where people might not have been tracking data and information in one specific way, and now you're asking them to, start doing that process in a different way. So I think that's where you can find success, though, on demonstrating your value for certain departments, on showing them how this information can actually be used in a more efficient way that will help drive change, not only for the department, but also for your agency as a whole, and which translates again to your residents, and then your broader business community.
Yeah, and what Rachel's describing, I think, Chelsea, if it's okay if I just add, is that like the evaluation's scary if you don't have some of these basic skills kind of built or their culture kind of built or growing. And so we all have to get there. So we meet people where they are, but I think we're also kind of still nudging some people who haven't been engaged with it toward. So we're nudging some people and we're pulling and we're guiding. But you can't get to that big evaluation place unless you sort of build that other data piece first.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I think one of the things that we hear, both in the training sprint that we did, but just in general with government, is that, one of the biggest challenges is sort of that adaptive, like, how do you bring people along? How do you think about change management? There is no sort of easy path. Everyone is different. Every government, every bureaucracy is different. Every level of interest is different. Even within a team, you're going to have those differing perspectives. And I hear you saying that, like, there's definitely that challenge of just like bringing people along and finding the opportunities to highlight why it's valuable and how it helps them directly is a really great way. I think with that, one question for when you've been able to either produce or review findings around program strategies or even your own data, have you experienced how that then gets used within your organization? Have you seen teams and departments actually take that data back and make changes?
I think for us personally, it's a new process, but I have seen a lot of that decision making comes from all levels of the organization. So not only leadership, but also staff. And I think that's where it translates across the organization's culture in terms of how do I actually use data and evidence in just my daily operations. And I think that's kind of what we're working towards. to be more efficient in terms of how do we actually prioritize projects? How are we actually allocating resources? Where can we identify different opportunities for improvements? So I think that's where, when we're talking about building this culture of evidence, it translates across the organization so that everyone has an opportunity to use it and leverage it in just their daily operations.
It's interesting. We're also still building kind of an appetite and the sort of muscles around this, like the muscle memory around this. But what's super interesting is, the program I'm working on right now, we're doing a lot of prospective looking ahead to see what can be evaluated now so we can produce results later. It's a really, really tough position to be in because we have to sell people on the value of doing the work, but we can't really tell them too much right now. But we were lucky that a few folks early on in the pandemic recovery did conduct evaluations of their work. And it just turns out that in our legislative session that just kicked off, the projects that have some positive findings from their early evaluations are the ones that are, receiving early attention. And so, but our leadership didn't really make that connection. That was just a really easy, in our reallocation of funds, what we prioritized were programs that we saw were having, early positive returns. So I've tried to feed that up the chain through leadership. That's an easy way of explaining to our legislative colleagues about the decision-making process. And it kind of reinforces for agencies, look, when you produce something that we can use as information or evidence, we can actually make it an actionable thing. So we're sort of starting to ask questions of the folks that have like good new evaluation. Well, what are you doing with this? Are you feeding it to your budget analysts? Is your legislative affairs person using this to actually make sure that your budget's protected? So there's a lot of really great opportunities, but it's still super new to people. And the thing is, nobody disagrees with the idea. Like we want to invest in things that work. Everybody agrees on that notion. I think the getting there part is really scary initially, because once you start looking at your data routinely, you don't know what it's going to say if you're not used to just routinely analyzing it, let alone then plugging it into a bigger evaluative structure. So we're starting to see early opportunities, but it's those opportunities I'm trying to emphasize for folks. Look, I was telling the truth all these 18 months when I said you're going to have an opportunity as we get these budget lines dry, ink dry on the budget. So.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we try to spend some time on in the lever training sprint around evaluation policies is thinking about budget decisions and the potential impact of using and building evidence that can have on how you get funded, whether certain initiatives are funded, whether you're given like more resources to improve or shift those things that might not be working as well as you'd like, or to help you consider sort of what the best decision points are around funding and your budget might be. One question I'd love, because we are in a lever focused session, to hear from you all is how you both participated in last year's evaluation policy training sprint. How did joining that 10-week set of sessions advance your thinking around evaluation culture and policy and all of this?
For me, at least, it brought together a really small team and developed a really great connection on the budget side of things. Because I think in our agency, rollout of such a policy will start internally. And we believe that it can be embedded in procurement, like competitive procurement opportunities as we look for new services. And we believe that also eventually can be rolled out for existing budget line items, but we're not quite there yet. And so it helped us really kind of crystallize a lot of things that we already know are good practice and put them together in something that's a little more actionable than just this is a great idea. The structure of the sprint, while it is intense, is great, because if you commit to doing something, you're going to have something at the end that gets produced. Like you have something you can hold on to that we're now, still working on revising and thinking about who is the reader here, who's the audience. But we wouldn't have had that if we hadn't engaged in the sprint. And this is the time that, like, the timing couldn't be better for us to start pushing this up the chain of leadership.
I think we had a very similar situation too at our city. I think in terms of building our internal team, it expanded our understanding of these practices and how we can actually use them in terms of our internal operations. And I think personally it enhanced some skill sets across the team, and which we could translate up to leadership of why this is important and how we could use this information to conduct evaluations more efficiently. And I would say definitely through the program, networking opportunities were amazing for us. We just had a cohort of cities and jurisdictions, state agencies that we were able to tap into and reach out. And some were kind of along multiple different journeys on this process. So I think for our city personally, it's fairly new, it's brand new in a lot of senses. So I think it was great for us to be able to just reach out and collaborate with other cities and jurisdictions to think about how they might be using this, because as we know, evaluations, it's not a one size fits all across all your jurisdictions. So I think, tapping into best practices across other agencies definitely helped us. And we're really thankful we were able to participate in the sprint.
Thank you both so much. With our last couple of minutes, I think we've had a lot of advice sort of laced through this whole session, but if you had sort of one piece of advice that you would give to a city, county, or agency that's starting on this journey, what would you tell them?
I would say for us, it's setting out with clear goals and expectations of, what you're trying to accomplish, whether that would be either improving service delivery, or maybe you want to measure the impact of your programs, or maybe you want to increase transparency. I think just setting clear goals and expectations of like what you're trying to accomplish and what those needs might mean to your city. I think that was one of the first things that we were trying to figure out as a whole of how can we stand this up and what do we want to achieve? So I would say just kind of taking a deep look internally in terms of your city's operations and how leadership might value this work, or translating that to across other departments. I think that would be the first step in terms of kind of trying to figure out how to build this process.
Yeah, I would ditto. And also I would say model the work. So, my unit is really focused on helping other units develop their own structure and strategy around using data and eventually, transforming that data into evidence and hopefully into an evaluation process. We have our own learning agenda. We're teaching people how to make learning agendas. We have our own processes and we're teaching people how to emulate those. And I think if you model or amplify as many as examples as you can, use the examples that you have. And I can't believe I'm saying this, because if my boss were sitting here, he'd laugh, but feel good about the little wins that you have, because I feel compelled to boil the ocean because of the American Rescue Plan. It's like a time limited, very high profile level of funding that states and municipalities received. But you have to really operate with you can't run it's a marathon. It might even be like the iron distance. So you have to go in small sprints and you have to take all the little wins that you can get. So people will come along for the idea, but you have to be patient.
Thank you both so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful that I get to hear about the incredible work that you're doing sort of regularly and more frequently than even this, but it was great to speak with you specifically with this group of folks that are listening in. Just so you all know, there are breakout sessions later. I think you get to pick which one you go to. They'll talk more about that, but we are happy to answer questions at that time. And at Results for America, we're always available to talk about Lever and other opportunities to upskill around data evidence and improving outcomes for your residents.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. As Chelsea mentioned, I think great pieces of advice sort of laced throughout. I am really excited to hear from our next panel on researcher government partnerships and state and local governments. So I will pass it along to my colleague, Emma Smith, who is a policy and research associate at JPAL North America, who will be facilitating this panel.
Hi, everyone. And first, thank you all so much for such a fantastic first panel. It's always so wonderful to hear from my colleagues and what they're doing and from their insights and expertise. My name is Emma. I'm a policy and research associate here at JPAL North America. And I've had the privilege of working with Chelsea and Louise, as well as with government partners through the Lever Evaluation Incubator Program. I'm very happy to introduce this panel, which will be focusing on the often asked questions about relationship building and cultivating researcher policymaker partnerships. For introductions, let's start with Emily and then go to Sean and Ricardo.
Great. Hi, so my name's Emily Owens, and oh, my screen froze for a second. So I am the chair of the Department of Criminology, Law and Society at the University of California, Irvine. I'm also the Dean's Professor of Criminology and Economics. So I'm an economist by training, and I'm someone who does sort of quantitative causal evaluation of programs within the criminal justice system. And I was, really lucky to have the opportunity to work with Sean in Shasta County for a couple of years, actually. That's your cue, Sean.
Oh, okay, I'll go from there. A couple of years because of COVID. I think it extended it out. I'm Sean Watts. I'm a retired annuitant here at the Shasta County Superior Court, and I work on various projects that the court has that they can funnel to someone who has the flexibility to work on different projects.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ricardo Basurto Davila. I'm the Chief Evaluation Officer for the County of San Diego, where I lead the Office of Evaluation Performance and Analytics. Our office is relatively new. We work across a variety of policy sectors, justice, health, social services, anything that the County of San Diego is involved in. We support their needs for evaluation, performance measurement, and data analysis in general. More specifically, when it comes to the project that brought us to Liver, we're evaluating a program that provides a $500 rent subsidy to low-income older adults who are at risk of homelessness. The subsidy lasts for 18 months. It's funded by the American Rescue Plan funding that was mentioned in the previous panel. And we're trying to evaluate whether this program increases financial stability and reduces the risk of experiencing homelessness for seniors in the County of San Diego.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And as we begin, a note to panelists that even if I address a question to someone, please feel free to jump in with any of your thoughts. And so first off, for Sean, could you talk about what led you to JPAL and how the evaluation incubator helped to launch and guide the study you eventually conducted with your research partner?
Sure. Back in about 2015, we were involved in a, pretrial release program in the state of California, where grants were offered to various agencies to expand their pretrial release system. So when we were involved in that, we discovered that we had a large problem with failures to appear in court. So a defendant would be cited or arrested and given a court date, and we discovered that sometimes up to 50% of them did not come to the court for their arraignment. So basically our system was breaking down, and we needed to find out why that was happening, and of course how to counteract it. So that led us to our parent agency, which is the Judicial Council of California. They do have researchers there, and they were aware of the opportunities that JPAL offered. So here at the local level, we applied for a JPAL grant, and we received it to study what's causing our FTAs and how we could improve the appearance rate of people who come to court. And from then, we developed our application. I attended the Evaluating Social Programs course, and we were paired with Emily to do a randomized controlled trial. And took a couple of years, but eventually we got it done, and we came up with some good results.
That's fantastic. Ricardo, I know you're at a slightly different stage of the evaluation process. Is that something that you'd be able to respond to as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I got an email at some point somewhere about Lever. I hadn't heard about him. This was sometime in 2022, shortly after I had started my job here in San Diego. And soon after WIPA was created, we got a couple of projects, and there was always the intent from my bosses, the county's board supervisors, to do randomized evaluation. I had never done an RCT, and I didn't have any staff. We have now a fantastic team of evaluators in our office, but this is more than a year and a half ago. I didn't have any staff, so I felt the urge to find out whatever support we could get to work on this. we were halfway through designing the evaluation and conducting randomizations when we applied to Lever and we got connected to Lever. And what has been a really nice experience in working with the program is that rather than trying to force us into, where they feel how we should do things, or start from scratch because maybe we didn't design it right, they met us where we were, and well, I guess you guys have been extremely helpful in understanding you've already taken care of this. Okay, now let's see what else we can help you do. Like you said, we're still halfway through. We have a couple of hundred people who are already receiving the subsidies, and we have a control group that is randomized. There's another group of people who are being added soon, and the evaluation is going to take a couple of years. So we don't have any results yet, but we're really excited about what's coming, and obviously happy about the partnership with Lever.
That's really exciting. And building off that question, can you describe how you have balanced the practical needs of your organization with the needs of the evaluation?
Yeah, this is a very important question for us, and we're still, figuring out our way on how to, on the one hand, fulfill the information needs of the county to allow them to make decisions, while also sticking to, the rigor, the objectivity that an evaluation requires. Timelines are a particularly tricky thing. Decision makers often need an answer yesterday, and these studies can often take a long time. In fact, I just mentioned that the program we're evaluating recently, they got extra funding and they expanded the program. And on the one hand, it's great that the county homelessness is a big problem in San Diego, and so the county is making investments in this area. On the other hand, I'm sure they wish they had seen results of the evaluation before adding funding to the program, but the results are not going to be in for a while. So that timeliness is something that is very important to us. Another issue that is specific to randomized evaluations is they need a lot of preparation before implementation, before the program begins being implemented. And when we started prepping the evaluation, designing the randomization for this program, I was often worried, what if the program is ready to go and they're just waiting for us? And this was our first project in San Diego, right after I was hired, the office was created. And so it would have been a terrible impression, and they're just waiting for us. And they tell me seniors need this money, right? We need to start giving this money away because people are struggling. And I'm telling you, well, but I need an IRB approval. You have to wait 2 months. So fortunately, it didn't work that way. Fortunately, everything worked fine. We were ready to go, before the program was ready to start, and everything worked out. But I cannot emphasize enough, if you're thinking about this, engage with evaluators as soon as you can. Even if you're not sure if you want to do an evaluation or a randomized evaluation, engaging as early as possible is very important.
Yeah, just building on that, I've been taking sort of notes on what Ricardo's saying and sort of themes that I think are important to highlight in terms of having researcher and practitioner partnerships that work. And the first one is just the importance of timelines and timing, because I think researchers and practitioners, again, just emphasizing Ricardo's point that like we can be under very different timelines and time pressures. Not just thinking about IRB and sort of ethical research constraints that, in academia that we're sort of bound by, that by construction take a long time. I think that the research partner who someone gets involved in, who practitioner gets involved in, can really affect those timelines as well. And I'm specifically referring to if you have like a senior researcher, someone who's like a full professor, a tenured person versus a junior researcher. Junior researchers are also under very tight timelines. They have a lot of pressure from academia to like get research projects done, to get them moving. And so in some ways that can be like an attractive partner for a practitioner who really wants to move fast, right? As a junior person who's also facing a lot of time pressure. At the same time, junior researchers also have strong incentives to produce, research that's going to get published in a peer-reviewed journal that's very prestigious, that contributes to, social science, which sometimes the sort of academic questions that might be really interesting are a little bit different from the very, are our policies doing what we want them to do questions. And senior researchers are going to have, just by construction, they have tenure. Academic freedom means that you don't face tight timelines, you also have the ability to really focus on questions that may lead to top academic publications, but may not. They might lead to really practical, important discoveries. And that, for a senior person, is totally okay. So there's sort of, trade-offs to think about and sort of work through when you're forming partnerships to make sure you all are on the same page. And it's also related to Ricardo's mention of being able to meet practitioners where they are in terms of what type of data they're collecting, how rich of a quantitative story can they tell with the administrative or evaluative data that they're currently collecting, or what are they capable of collecting? I think, again, the pressures that junior, non-tenured or associate professors are under, might limit their ability to meet people where they are because, again, they need to publish research that's going to meet, academic standards in order to get tenure. They bring a lot, junior people bring a lot of energy, but are going to be a little bit more constrained in what they're really what they really should be able to do from their perspective, whereas senior people have more flexibility.
Thank you. In your perspective as a researcher, how do you measure the success of a research or government partnership, both in terms of the process and also the outcome?
So, I think having a lot of communication is really helpful, right? Where, I feel like when I'm communicating with a practitioner, they're hearing what I'm saying and that we're able to sort of problem solve and feel like we have, productive conversations moving forward. In terms of what success looks like, when we're able to complete an analysis and find a result that provides actionable information to a research partner is what I would consider a success. And again, this is me speaking as someone who's like a full professor, right? I want policies that work, and that's sort of my professional goal right now is that policies do what we want them to do. Another thing, from my academic side is also, a project is complete when I've taken the sort of written sort of academic scholarly work as far as it can go. So in the case of Shasta County, what we discovered was that, the sending people text message reminders about their court dates appeared to be like pretty successful in encouraging people to show up in court. This was maybe differentially true across the population. We found evidence that, for people who were unlikely to be unhoused, the text messages worked great. If we focused on the pretty large unhoused population of people charged with misdemeanors, stuff got a lot more murky. And what we also discovered in the process of doing this, because of the way we were collecting data, was that when one of the reasons people were maybe not responding to some of the text messages was because the court's phone numbers were not as accurate as they could be. And by could be, I mean, just like the data collection system, I think it was a small update, Sean, that the court changed that had just better information about what people's phone numbers were.
Yeah, I would agree with Emily for the original question, what is success? And it's a study that gives us some results that we can translate into a policy change to improve what we're doing. And that's pretty much what ours did. It told us what effect text messaging would have on the general court population. And then the subset of the homeless people, it showed us that if we were to text them or even go to places where they usually congregate, such as here in Reading at the rescue mission, that texting them or reminding them had no effect on their court appearance rate, and they still failed to appear. So I would agree with Emily totally on that.
Yeah, Sean, thanks for reminding me. Another thing that we discovered in our study was that, and this goes to, you can't, sometimes policies don't work out. Going into this in the planning process, I think we were kind of hopeful about working with one of the largest sort of homeless shelters in Reading. They had a really nice system where if someone checked into services, they could be automatically, told that there's a message at the front desk, and they could be sort of reminded in person, right, that they had an upcoming court date. And that this seemed really like something that could be, everyone had a sense that this was going to be really effective for reaching this population. And what we discovered I think in large part due to Sean's relationship with the community. The Good News Rescue Mission was very willing to share access to their intranet with us, and we sort of were able to look through their records and say, okay, like what is the size of the population of people who are coming into contact with the court and also getting services, and it was really small, right? And so this pretty costly intervention was just really unlikely to be something that was going to work out. And so that was actually a policy that really had, I think, a very strong logic model. But in practice, once we were able to take a look at the data and what was actually going on, it really seemed like perhaps we should just really be focusing on getting better data about text messages. That is a little bit that's cheaper and might actually have a bigger bang, let alone bigger bang for the buck.
Yeah,
sometimes...
and kind of directed us to treat the homeless population as a separate entity with regard to failures to appear, and maybe a need for more studies there on how we can better affect them.
For sure. And that's, I think that they're going back to the first panel, right, and why it can be sort of scary to think about doing evidence-based policy, particularly when you're a practitioner who's really like invested in a particular program. Sometimes programs aren't going to work out, but that I think is really important to know that when local governments have fixed resources, we want to be spending money on what works, and sometimes we find out that stuff doesn't work, and we should be, if we want policies to improve people's social outcomes and reduce poverty, right? We should be spending money on what works and finding out what doesn't work.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear. In our final 2 minutes, do you have any brief pieces of advice that you would give jurisdictions looking to establish effective partnerships with researchers for program evaluation?
I'll go something quickly. And I know there are a few folks from San Diego County who are part of the audience. I hope nobody from our Department of Purchasing and Contracting is there because they wouldn't like what I'm going to say. But county procurement processes are probably not the best way to build relationships with academics or external researchers. Usually you release an RFP, you get an evaluator to come and do a project for you. They finish, they wrap up, they give you a report, and then they go away. And maybe they'll apply against something else, but even if they apply, they may not get it. And you lose a lot of knowledge. You lose a lot of, the collaboration that you already established with them. I think it is worth it to try to build a long-term relationship with academics. Find your local university or reach out to one of the big ones who have experts in your area of interest, and spend time building the relationship, discussing your interests, their interests. If there's an alignment, then maybe start figuring out how you can go after funding from external funding, or if you were able to fund them directly. But I think that long-term relationship will lead to more success, and for them to understand your work, your context, your policy areas, your information needs better than if you're always just one-off projects. I would say we're just starting to try to do that in San Diego, but I've seen it work in other places, and I think it leads to more effective collaborations.
Thank you so much.
For my part, I think the advice is that for small agencies like ours, city, county agencies that don't have the resources to conduct research, the JPAL opportunity is really great. It not only provides the funding, but it teaches us about the importance of randomized controlled trials, which small agencies like ours don't even think about when they're implementing policy changes. We have an idea of what might work, and we change the policy, and we hope somewhere down the road we can measure that it was successful. But without an RCT, you really don't know what was functioning on that process. So I think it's worth it, and anyone who has the opportunity should try to use your resources.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This has been an incredible conversation, and it's been really fantastic to learn from all of you. As a reminder, we'll be continuing this conversation in a breakout room. So if you have questions, please join us and continue this fantastic discourse. And with that, I'll pass this off to my colleague, Noreen, for our third panel.
Thank you, Emma. So we'll start our third panel on engaging communities in research and policy. I'm really excited to kick off this third and final panel. We've been doing a lot of thinking about this at JPAL. What does community engagement look like in research? Why is it important and how can we do it well? So I'm thrilled we'll have a chance to hear from our panelists, Alicia Sasser-Modestino, Rashad Cope, and Meredith Sadin, on how they define community engagement, what they see as the major benefits of engaging in this work, and how have they done this. So I will turn this over to Alicia, Rashad, and Meredith in that order for some quick introductions before we kick off the panel.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be part of this panel. I think these kinds of conversations are just so helpful in pushing this work forward. I'm Alicia Modestino. I'm a professor with joint appointments in the Econ Department and the School of Public Policy at Northeastern University. Since 2015, I've also been the research director for the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy. And that's where I've worked with a lot of projects in partnership with community stakeholders across a variety of different topics, including workforce development, affordable housing, opioids, criminal justice issues. And then last year, I launched a new community engaged research initiative here at Northeastern called Community to Community. And this is a $4.5 million impact accelerator that supports research practice partnerships across our global university campus. So I'll pass it to Rashad.
Great, thanks, Alicia. And is it morning still? It is still morning. Good morning, everyone. Noreen, thank you so much, the JPAL team and MIT, just for the invitation to join the discussion today. And thank you to the fellow panelists, Alicia and Meredith as well. As Alicia mentioned, my name is Rashad Cope, serving as one of two deputy chiefs for the City of Boston's Worker Empowerment Cabinet. Where we focus on two central areas. One is worker protections, safety and rights, really by regulating, overseeing and improving workplace conditions and health for workers across the city of Boston. And two, which is more central to the work that we've been doing with Alicia, is through workforce development by expanding economic opportunity for workers through access to quality jobs, skill trainings, and career pipelines. And when we think about the workforce development component of this, we know we must think about our youngest workers, our youngest workforce, and ensuring we are improving our youth jobs programs across the city that will prepare young people with the skills needed for the labor market and access to jobs across emerging industries. So excited to be a part of that research work with Alicia and Northeastern for the past several years. So I'll pass it over to Meredith.
Thanks so much, Rashad. My name is Meredith Sadin. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy and a faculty affiliate at the Possibility Lab. And I'm really happy to be here today because the Possibility Lab has been having such similar conversations in our work, really focusing on community engaged research. And so a lot of my research approach kind of comes at the intersection of community and government in kind of serving either as a middle person or entity and connecting those aspects towards kind of collaborative and productive research from, in areas ranging from criminal legal reform, public health, workforce development, all with the kind of thinking that individuals that are closest to social problems are also closest to their solutions. And, that policy actually functions really well when policymakers and researchers and those with lived experiences can develop a framework to collaborate effectively. So I'm really happy to be here today and have this conversation with Rashad and Alicia and Noreen.
Thank you all for those introductions. And just to get right into it, Alicia, I wanted to start with you. We hear a lot about community engagement. We know that there is a growing interest from researchers to do this work. We're hearing it from policymakers who want to engage with this more, but what this means can actually be pretty broad. And so I'd like you to maybe start by offering up a definition of, how do you see community in your research, and how do you define kind of community engagement in the work that you do?
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right. Researchers have increasingly been doing things that are community engaged. I might even call some of my economics colleagues more community curious than really knowledgeable about how to do this. And for them, it's meant everything from, just incorporating some qualitative research to gain insights into mechanisms, or get stories behind the quantitative results of things like surveys and interviews and focus groups. But these approaches really still treat participants as research subjects, and they really fail to center the lived experiences of the people who are most affected by these interventions. And so what I think of as true community engaged research is where the researchers actually work in partnership with stakeholders and engage them in every step of the research process. And this can mean, working with state agencies, city departments, community-based organizations, or even directly with residents in a participatory action research project where those folks are actually like resident researchers. And so through my work, I've really developed what I call an engage, think, and do model that we use throughout all of our projects. So, we start with co-developing what the research questions are, right? Because as an academic, I'm contributing to social science. I think we heard on the prior panel, but not always thinking about the questions that need to be answered on the ground, right? So that's where I would turn to Rashad, and we would set the research agenda together. Even designing the analysis together, collecting the data in a way that is ethical beyond IRB considerations, right? When you're surveying or interviewing young people, there's a whole other, realm of considerations we need to think about. Interpreting the research findings correctly together and in context. I think, some researchers, might bristle at that and think like, oh, they're telling you what they think the answer should be. I see it as, how would you ever know how to interpret this data if you weren't talking to the people who are actually living in it every day? And there's so many times Rashad would provide me with an insight that would really kind of school me, if you will, in what was actually happening in the data. And then finally, co-developing the solutions to come to things that are feasible, impactful, and sustainable, right? I have great ideas that I throw all the time at Rashad, and he's like, Alicia, we can't do X, Y, and Z, but we can do, A, B, and C, right? And so that's really super helpful in, sort of thinking about new pilot interventions to test. But the last thing I'll just say is this approach is really time and resource intensive. I often say we can only move at the speed of trust. And that means we often start small, analyzing, a small data set or doing a process evaluation before, to understand that local context before we even get into a randomized control trial. Like I never say randomize on the first date, but that investment pays off down the road, because once we do that, we really understand how a policy or a program is working. The devil's always in the details, and that can make all the difference when you're doing an RCT down the road in terms of whether the right populations are served, whether the services are delivered to produce the desired outcomes, and whether those outcomes actually improve people's lives.
Thank you, Alicia. That's incredibly comprehensive. And, I think I'd love to hear, Rashad, from you about, after hearing sort of how Alicia presented this, how does this intersect with the role that you see community playing in government?
Yeah, I would say there absolutely is alignment through a government lens, and as it relates to pretty much the work of our cabinet and the youth employment initiatives. I see community as just the intersection of city priorities and funding, our service providers, and the constituents who are the beneficiaries of the city services. So collectively, the community can be one, our internal stakeholders, who are folks across all the cabinets and departments, because those folks play a pivotal role in how we structure the delivery of the youth jobs opportunities. So when we work with Alicia and we are identifying like areas where there's system improvements that are required, we need to lean on our internal city stakeholders around system improvements. When we focus on issues around engaging the community and ways to do that better, we need to lean on our city agency community engagement cabinet around effective ways to engage the populations that we're serving. And when we're talking about policy changes, to the youth jobs landscape, we need to lean on our policy team within the mayor's office around how do we effectively understand policy implications that is coming out of this research work. So definitely, internal stakeholders is a pivotal component of community. And then I also see, our external stakeholders who are employer providers. Those are our nonprofits, our companies, our education institutions who we fund and collaborate with to design and create the workforce readiness opportunities for Boston's young people. So we need to find ways to engage them, what we do, and they're a pivotal aspect when we're talking about community. And then lastly, our youth and our families whom we must build relationships with and use their engagement and how we engage with them to inform how we can better support them. So I think within all of that, pretty much like government should be at the center of community engagement. And I think with our work with Alicia, it does feel like, we play that role and can continue to have an impact when it comes to just research-informed agendas.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to go back to a point that Alicia raised and maybe turning it to you, Meredith. Engaging communities, it takes quite a bit of time investment, right? I mean, as Alicia mentioned, you can only move as fast as the speed of trust. And so with that, it's important to also think about the benefits, like why do we engage in this work? What can we learn? And so, I'd like to hear from your perspective, what have you seen as the benefit from engaging with communities in the research process? Oh, Meredith, I think you're muted.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great question. And, the benefits really differ depending on the stakeholder. So I'll speak, first as a researcher. For me, it's important as a social scientist to operationalize and measure as accurately as we possibly can. And when we develop top-down, and when I say top-down, I mean either researcher generated or maybe kind of less informed indicators of kind of policy effectiveness, we miss a lot. And so, as a researcher, engaging communities actually enables better measurement. So the Possibility Lab has done, a number of projects on this. My colleague at the lab, Naomi Levy, has kind of spearheaded the firsthand framework for policy innovation, right? And so this is kind of starting, kind of flipping the script a bit and asking, okay, we have thought about, for instance, public safety in myriad ways. We have reimagined it. There have been tons of collaborations, but what does public safety actually really look like when people define it themselves? And so, there have been, I believe it was like multiple town halls, 24 focus groups all across Oakland that the lab has conducted in partnership and really shared leadership with community-based organizations in Oakland. And indicators that have arisen from that work are indicators that just would never be generated and validated with a traditional research approach, right? So like you can hear birds instead of helicopters. That isn't how I know my community is safe. Conversely, we observe fight pages on social media, right? That is how I know community is, I don't have a sense of public safety. So again, it's firsthand framework, enabling this triad, right, of the public sector researchers and people with lived experience who are experts to measure just more accurately. And to that effect, there are some validated research tools that just don't apply to a lot of populations. So, I'm thinking about another project that we did with incarcerated college students and in San Quentin, and workshopping validated batteries on mental health that have been validated on college students that are not currently incarcerated, right? Not developed for people who are in prison and ask questions that are completely just not applicable and not a valid way of measuring mental health. So from my perspective, it just enhances the validity of the research itself. It also granted, which, Alicia and Rashad have mentioned, I think it deepens the sustainability of the research itself, right? The ability to really develop a long-term partnered research agenda that is not a one-off evaluation. And then quickly, because I feel like I've been talking for a while, enabling, the recruitment of diverse representative participants that are not just recruited, they are partnered. So there's a real capacity building piece of this that kind of carries forward in the policy findings, but also, as I said, kind of generating partnership through research, but also service delivery that kind of pays dividends, for years to come.
Can I just jump in with one additional benefit that I see? Like totally +1 everything that you just said, but I think it's also, putting those lived experiences on par with academic knowledge, right? So that we can really get much better, not just at the measurement and the delivery, but also at building that capacity. And so I think about the work that I've done with Rashad, and we've been studying summer jobs for 8 years together, right? And we every year we get down a layer into thinking about the application, the hiring, the onboarding process, and we've uncovered some key insights with the data. We've helped kind of push some of the processes to be more equitable, to be more efficient. But at the end of the day, we've actually learned that we do not know very much as adults how young people select jobs and decide what jobs to apply to. And the bottlenecks that we know where they get stuck in the process, but we really don't know why. And so this summer we're running like a true youth participatory action research project where we will have like over 100 young people who will serve as resident researchers to help us uncover this problem, and they're studying a program that's very important to them, right? It's empowering them to be able to do that. They're developing a set of research skills. So we're also evaluating what does the YPAR project and participating in it do for those young people as well. So I think there's that whole capacity building that can go all the way down, like to the resident or the participant level.
Absolutely, Alicia. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And I'm going to share in the chat just a link to the firsthand framework that kind of speaks for itself in terms of centering just lived experience, putting it on par, or elevating it above a kind of traditional academic or research perspective.
Thank you all so much. I know we are approaching time, so just as folks are thinking about sort of their breakout rooms, I wanted to close our panel by thanking our panelists for their deep expertise that they've shared with us now, and also encourage folks that if you have questions about what could this look like on your projects or potential challenges, practical tips, please come to our breakout group so that we can dive into this a bit deeper with all of you. So a big thank you to our panelists for this information.
Great. Well, thank you all so much again to all of our panelists. I think so many great takeaways, and I'm sure lots of sort of burning questions, which we would love to hear from all of you in our breakout discussion sessions. So as a reminder, these were the topics of each of our breakout rooms. And I believe Leslie will be sharing an opportunity to choose which breakout group you would like to attend. So please feel free to choose, and we'll kind of help folks get to where they need to go. Well, thank you all so much for joining our session today, for attending our panel sessions. Thank you again to our panelists, as well as participating in our breakout discussion. I think we wanted to wrap up really with just some sort of resources, next steps, and kind of what to expect from us next in the last couple of minutes that we have here. So we invite you to join us in creating a culture of evidence and data use and decision-making that can improve the lives of residents for years to come. So we have an evaluation incubator, the application for which is now live, as well as our training sprint and the application for our Evaluating Social Programs course. If you'd like to discuss any of these opportunities in more detail, or if you'd otherwise like to connect with us around evidence and evaluation, please sign up for office hours using the link that we will share in the link tree just on the next slide. So this has a number of resources, including a link to sign up for office hours, just really if you'd like to hear more from us, and if you'd like to continue to engage. And I think that's it. So please, if you're able, provide feedback before you log off. Leslie is dropping a link to the feedback form. And thank you so much. And we still look forward to continuing the conversation and staying connected.